Come on in, kick your feet up, grab your favorite beverage as it's time to get coached up with another edition of the Coach Scott Field Show. You could be watching us on DBTV, a national and international cable network that is a first of its kind at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Or you could be watching us on CSTV Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. or the Rewind Sports 60 network and channels. Thanks for choosing us for your viewership options. I am grateful. If you're listening to us in podcast form, T-Mass and I say turn that knob up. Let us put that flavor in your ear. That's right. You're about to be coached up for another edition of the Coach Scott Field Show. Let me get the business and the algorithms out of the way. Like and follow the Facebook page, The Coach Scott Field Show. Subscribe for free to the YouTube channel, The Coach Scott Field Show, as we sure appreciate you. Hit those emoji reactions, send in your questions and your comments, and we'll be sure to get right back with you. And without further ado, my man, T-Mass, Hercules, Tony Massenburg, author of Lessons from Lenny. And Tony, thank you so much for sending me a copy. I was reading it this weekend while I was laying out at the pool with the wife, and I was captivated. I got right into it, and it triggered all the emotions of what I was feeling back in 1986 as you're describing your lessons from Lenny. So, Tony, welcome to the show. Thrilled to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Scott. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, I've been really looking forward to this. You and I have been discussing this behind the scenes. I appreciate you taking the time to send me the copy. And again, just really enjoy that. To get started, talk about and kind of reintroduce your teammate and the collaborator on this book with you, Mr. Walt Williams.
Well, first of all, to know the story between Walt and I, you have to know the history. I was at the University of Maryland, and as we talk about in the book, I played 1 year with Len Bias, who was my basketball idol from high school. And Walt Williams actually came to the University of Maryland 2 years later. Also, another guy who idolized Len Bias, even though he was, 2 years later, 3 years later, actually. And so that's how we really got to know each other as teammates. And then we both would end up in the NBA and play. I think Walt played 10 years. I played 13 years. And we were teammates once with the Houston Rockets. And so we talk, a lot about our journey and the role that the positive lessons that we learned from Lenny and the positive influence that he was to not just Walt and I, but so many others, as the book illustrates and talks about the legion of guys who actually came to the University of Maryland, not in spite of Len Bias, but because of Len Bias.
And I think you articulated it very well, Tony. I sit there and I think about, it's one of those moments, especially for us in the industry who are basketball guys. It's one of those, where were you when? And you'll always remember where you were when you first heard the news. Lenny Bias, 1986. Arguably the most athletic, talented forward to be drafted into the league at that time. Compared a lot to Michael Jordan, as you guys, squared off several times. These are insights that only you can share because you got to know him. You got to play pickup with him. You got to play a season with him with the Terps there with Lefty. Describe for the viewers, who was Len Bias if you didn't have the chance to be around him and know his energy?
To really, first of all, I'll just talk about the basketball talent because people can't grasp, that part of just, they know the name, but they don't truly understand the talent that he was and how truly special he was. Really gifted as a basketball player. You're talking about a guy that's about 6'8". I believe he was about 220 pounds when he died. And at that time, most guys were power forwards, at that size. And we're talking about a guy who shot the ball like a two guard, okay? Not like a small forward. He was going to play small forward and power forward at the NBA level, but he shot the basketball like a two guard in distance, and the way he shot it, the form was just beautiful. One of the most beautiful jump shots I have ever seen to this day. Just tremendous verticality. You're talking 36, inches off the floor every time he goes to shoot a shot. And that type of athleticism allowed him to just be able to shoot over the top of 7-foot guys or anybody that was in front of him. And he consistently did that. And, you're also talking about somebody who was strong enough to play against 4s and 5s in the inside. So you got this unbelievable, power and finesse combination that we literally have never seen. Athletically, you're talking about a 40-inch vertical, 40-plus inch vertical on a 6'8" guy, in the mid-80s. That's just something you did not see at that time period. And you don't even see that now. And the feathery touch on the jump shot, combined with the ability to play with his back to the basket, shooting hook shots, he was truly unstoppable on the offensive side of the ball. So if he had gotten a chance to go and play with the Boston Celtics, where he was drafted number 2 in the 1986 NBA draft, there's no question in my mind that he would have developed into the rival that Michael Jordan probably never really had, because no one truly met him athletically on the basketball court. But Len Bias could have matched his athleticism. He was a little bit bigger, stronger, and taller, and with a similar skill set in the way of the power and speed and the finesse, and most importantly, the tenacity, the mentality, and that dog mentality you hear us talk about. He was a guy that really wanted to win and had that same type of drive as Jordan.
See, and I think you said that so eloquently, because I think back of the videotapes that I've seen, just the elevation that he would get on that jump shot, whether his back was to the basket on a fadeaway or coming off the dribble, the way he would rise and elevate, like you said, that soft touch. It was, I mean, what a athletic specimen he was, but he also had that competitive spirit to where, he just wanted to beat you. And I'm sure you got to witness that firsthand in pickup games and, playing with him for that season. Talk to us about the person, who he was off the floor.
Well, for his teammates, for guys like myself, who was a freshman and a guy who literally came, to the University of Maryland and was a fan of the University of Maryland in high school because of Len Bias. To me, it was like what it would have been if you could have put Kobe Bryant, in high school at a time when Michael Jordan was, who he was at the University of North Carolina. Kobe had the opportunity to go to Carolina to play on MJ. That would have happened. And that's how I felt with Len Bias. When I saw him in high school, he was everything that I wanted to be as a basketball player. He was athletic. He was a forward that could shoot the basketball, out to the three-point line, which did not exist at the time that he was playing college basketball. A lot of people don't understand that. This guy led the ACC in scoring his junior and senior year and was player of the year, and literally was shooting jump shots that if they had a college line, they would have counted as threes at a time when people just did not see forwards shooting the basketball that deep from the corners and from the top of the key. Those were the areas where he was really effective, but particularly in those corners, he was deadly.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you're sharing with the viewers and the listeners of the show just how special and how gifted he was, because he was truly phenomenal. And like you said, would have easily, with his mindset, with his skill set, would have rivaled that of an MJ. So, the basketball landscape changed. I can't imagine being a teammate and being able to be around him where, players make players better. And how do you feel because of his physical presence and gifts on the court? How did it make you a better player?
Well, for me, first of all, as a freshman, I showed up to the University of Maryland. I wasn't even done growing. I still had another inch to grow. Showed up at 6'8". I was about 215 pounds at that time, and I saw this, like I said, the perfect basketball player in my mind at that time. Perfect body, tremendous athleticism, the dog mentality, powerful around the basket, the finesse, touch on the outside. It was, like I said, it was every single thing that I aspired to be. So from a body standpoint, I was still growing, knew I had to, hit the weights hard. And I saw the pictures of Len Bias when he was a freshman, and he was also slim. And I also saw the dedication that he put toward becoming a better basketball player, and particularly his work ethic in the weight room. And I saw that play out. I saw how him being quicker, how him being stronger, really helped elevate his game on top of the things that he did on the court, in the gym, before and after practice. So what it did for me was give me the blueprint to being the best that I could be. And if I want to be like this guy, meaning Len Bias, then I have to follow that blueprint. I have to commit to the weight room. I have to commit to the gym. And during that year that I set out after his death, that's what I did. And so, the next time, I go from, being on the basketball court with Len Bias as a freshman, being a 6'8", 215-pound freshman, and the next time he saw me, I was a 6'9", 230-pound sophomore who had set out one year. So I redshirted, but I committed that year to developing my body and getting better academically and being the best version of myself. And I dedicated all that work to Lenny, who was, obviously on my mind every single day, as it would be for any teenager who goes through a situation like I did, where you lose not only your teammate, but your idol and your basketball, your basketball god, so to speak. So for me, I truly, dedicated myself to reinventing myself and being as much like him as I could possibly be.
Man, I love that. Ladies and gentlemen, again, we've got Tony Massenburg with us, one of the authors of Lessons with Lenny. He's describing the life lessons that he learned from the late, great Lenny Bias. Phenomenal book. And I encourage and I implore everybody to go out and get Lessons from Lenny, written by Tony Massenburg and his teammate, Walt Williams. What a lot of people don't know, and you're too humble to say this, so let me ring your bell for you, Tony. Um, only a few guys have played with 12 different NBA franchises, and you are one of those guys to play 13 seasons, 12 teams in the NBA. Also played in Spain, also played in Puerto Rico. Phenomenal career. So I want people to know that, yeah, you were a second round draft pick by the Spurs, the 43rd pick. So this guy who is sharing these insights with you knows what he's talking about. And, he's drafted in 1990 by the Spurs, who was the head coach, Larry Brown. R.C. Buford was on the staff. And, of course, one of the best coaches to
Guy
ever do it
named
now.
Greg Popovich.
Yes, that's right, Coach Pop. I mean, but you had Terry Cummings, you had David Robinson with you, Sean Elliott, Avery Creo Gumbo was down there with you. So, I mean, let's talk about how, take us through that time. And it could be emotional. And if it is, I understand, but it's compelling to me because it gripped me in the book. Take us to when you're in the dorm and you're getting the knocks on the door, and there's this frantic confusion about what has happened to Lenny right after he had been drafted. Take us through those feelings and emotions and what you were going through personally when you're getting that knock on the door.
Well, first of all, you got to realize it's about 5:15 a.m.
Right.
Like everybody's, is pretty much is dead asleep at that point.
Right.
And not just asleep, but in a very deep sleep. So you're waking from a deep sleep to, literally a panic knock on the door, banging on the door, and that's from a teammate, David Gregg, who was in the room with Lenny. And, he's obviously frantic and telling us that, Lenny had a seizure or whatever the case is, and he, is at the hospital, and was in the ambulance. So of course we're all like, okay, seizure, like that, sounds strange, but okay, So we run down, hop in the car and we run down there, and obviously the word spreads amongst our teammates, and then eventually we're all there in the waiting room, and we're there when his mother arrives. And, she goes in the back and she's there for about, maybe a half hour or so. and we're just expecting her to come out and just tell us that, Lenny, maybe had a bad reaction to something he ate, or he had asthma or whatever. We don't know what to expect, but we obviously weren't ready for what she would say. And when she came out, she looked at us and she said, "He's gone." And she was not crying. She was not, even very emotional about it. And, obviously we were, grief stricken at that point, and, just in a complete disarray in the way of, our emotions. And as you can imagine, so we weren't emotionally prepared to hear anything like that.
Yeah.
And so, we were all devastated, all of us. And at that point, we knew that, none of our lives would be the same. And, but we didn't know to the degree, because we were so devastated, by losing Lenny the way that we did, that we couldn't ever anticipate, what would come, afterwards. And more importantly, how he died. So, that was obviously a tough time. But what we talk about, or what I talk about, is the strength, basically that, my teammates and I drew from that.
Yeah.
And that's part of what, kept me at the University of Maryland. And that's part of what drew Walt Williams to the University of Maryland, as a guy who was, as big a fan of Lenny as I was. He just happened to not be his teammate because he was still in high school. But he wanted to come to the University of Maryland because of Len Bias, and he did. And when he had his opportunity to leave, when the university would fall on some sanctions, when Bob Wade was dismissed, then, that showed Walt's commitment. And that's kind of what we sort of get into, and we talk about why we were motivated and influenced by Len Bias, and we're able to not only stay, but come back and do some things as well.
Right. And to give them the appetizer, what's in the book, lessons from Lenny, because I want them to go out and get the copy of the book
Mhm.
and learn from that. But I just can't imagine processing the feelings and emotions to have your role model, your basketball reason, your inspiration, and how to process that initial knock and frantic, time in the dorm when you've just all celebrated the news that he was being drafted by his
Yeah.
dream team,
Yep.
hanging out with Red Auerbach, talking about, in open gyms, 3-2-1 Larry Bird, so
Mhm.
going from that euphoric high of being so proud of your teammate. It's not just like Lenny made it, but it's like we made it. And if he can
Exactly.
do it, we can do it. And
Yep.
I like how you shared that in the book, but to just go through and see the strength of his mother to come out and address the team with the strength and the courage and the bravery that she had, because she's grieving in her way as well, to have just lost a son. So not only did the basketball community lose a phenomenal, gifted athlete, but the community lost a supreme person. And the lessons that you guys drew from that, I think are phenomenal. So I see Walt Williams coming in to University of Maryland. Cue the button by Scotty Van Pelt. I like turtles. I just I think about how he proverbially passed that torch on to you, Tony, where now you're into the NBA and you have that illustrious career, and from the lessons that you learned from him, from work ethic and, just being that dog and being competitive and being serviceable and playing your role. So Tony, I can't thank you enough for sharing this with us, because I can't imagine how even today, some 35 years later, how it still affects you and has a hold on your heart and soul to carry that message to allow his legacy to continue to live on.
Yeah, it's not just a basketball story; it's a life story,
That's right.
and that's the other thing that Walt and I touch on in the book. And one of the real interesting things, I told you the story of how I ended up at the University of Maryland, but guys, when you read the book, Walt has the most interesting story of how he ended up being a Terrapin, and I'm not going to go into it,
Yeah.
but it's like really worth just to hear the story, because it's not what a lot of people think. And that's what's part of what makes it so special. And the fact that, him and I were both united at the University of Maryland by our love for Len Bias. And we would go on to be teammates and have long careers in the NBA, driven by the lessons from Lenny, even at that time before we even thought about writing the book. It's just ironic, man. And it's, I cherish my friendship with him. And we often talk about our college days and our pro days. And of course, we still talk about Len Bias. And, he always gets his kick out of the Len Bias stories that I tell him. So it's really, the book really talks about all of that and gets into, like I said, the positive influence that he not just was on Walt and I, but on the University of Maryland, on the championship team in particular. We tie it all in, and these are things that you learn in the book.
That's right. And again, it's Lessons from Lenny by teammates Tony Massenburg, yourself, and your teammate Walt Williams. Where can they get a copy of that book?
The book is available anywhere books are sold, but the special order, we have limited edition autograph copies that are available through lessonsfromlenny.com. So we encourage people to buy from lessonsfromlenny.com because we have those books personally signed by Walt and I. And those can only be had through our website, lessonsfromlenny.com. So but the book is available anywhere books are sold.
And I love that. And please, you guys, I know it sounds like we're just promoting, Lenny, but the stories in the book, I think will grab you. And again, I was captivated at the pool. I mean, it was 100 degrees at the pool out here in Salt Lake City this last weekend. And I'm sitting out there getting dizzy and getting burnt on my bald spot. But I'll tell you what, it was so good, I couldn't put it down. And my wife's like, babe, you're not even talking to me. I'm like, babe, this book is heartfelt, and the way that you guys share your stories in it just did a great job, Tony. So congratulations on it. I know it's going to be successful. I really encourage our viewers and listeners to go out and get that book. Let's talk about some other things, Tony. Here you are, University of Maryland. You played through 3 different coaches. You don't have to go into all of it because it's in the book, but talk about, playing for Lefty and then Coach Bob Wade coming in. And then again, championship coach Gary Williams, coming in towards the end of your career there. Talk about what it was like to try to, pick up different terminology and go through 3 different philosophies and style of play as you're still navigating your way to be the Tony Massenburg who's going to go on and have, a 12-year, 13-year career in the NBA.
Well, it was less about navigating the 3 different systems. That was just part of having to make the transitions. But, the things that we had to deal with as a result of the fallout of Lenny's situation, really, that was the real kind of challenge, to get around that, because we were still under scrutiny as a university, and just a big question mark, loomed over the heads of the team. So for us, we always, at that point, particularly when Bob Wade came in and, Lefty was unfortunately let go. And then, Bob Wade is hired. For the guys who were left, it was about, proving that we were not bad individuals. We understood what had happened, but everybody who had anything to do with that had been accounted for. And the guys who were left there knew nothing more than people in the general public. So for us to have to carry to deal with the fallout and stigma, that was attached to us, was not easy. So when you talk about the transition, the bigger transition was just trying to be a normal, college athlete.
Yeah.
And that wasn't easy at that time. And so for me, playing under, Bob Wade, and having a successful sophomore season, I played under Bob Wade for 2 years. I sat out 1 year under him and played for him for 2 years. I had 2 good years, statistically. My sophomore year was actually my breakout season. And, I came back a much better basketball player and a guy who was dedicated and driven, by the lessons from Lenny. And that powered me through the rest of my Maryland career into my senior year, when Gary Williams took over. So for me, there were a couple of things going on. You know, I was on a mission to graduate from the University of Maryland, which I did. I was also on a mission to make myself into the best basketball player. And if I'm eligible to play in the NBA, you know, that's my dream. And so I would love to achieve that. And I got to achieve both. I was drafted, you know, despite, you know, guys being, you know, somewhat looked down upon at that time from the University of Maryland because of what had happened. But I was all ACC, and I saw guys, you know, that were being drafted in front of me who, you know, did not have statistically as good a, you know, numbers as I had, or in my mind were not as good of players. And, you know, I think our NBA careers kind of proved that, because I ended up outlasting, you know, pretty much all of those guys.
That's right. Yeah.
So, you know, that just speaks to what I was dedicated to at the University of Maryland. So for me, again, talking about the book, The Lessons from Lenny, you know, everything that I went through from the coaches, that prepared me. I played for, you said it at the top of the show, I played for 12 teams. Well, you know, I learned how to play in different systems in college because I had 3 college coaches. So that prepared me to play, you know, for 12 teams, and not only just play for 12 teams, but be productive.
That's right.
As soon as I show up. You know, in the pros, a lot of times you don't have time to learn the system before they throw you out there and say, show us what you got. Yep. So you either sink or swim. And if, you know, you've gotten there and you've got literally a couple of days to show what you got, and you know, you don't have time to learn the system. So you got to learn how to be productive. And that's, you know, those are things that I mastered at the University of Maryland. I can get points. I can get rebounds. I can make a difference on the defensive end. I can give a coach a reason to play me in any situation, you know, even if I'm not the featured guy. So that's, you know, that's what I learned to do at the University of Maryland that carried me.
I love that, because I mean, let's talk about it. I mean, still you're in the top, you know, 8 of offensive rebounders at the University of Maryland still, and yet, you know, play all these years. But I just can't imagine of trying to be a teenager or in your early 20s and grieving the loss of your role model, and yet learning, just like the community was, about the autopsy and finding out that it was a cocaine overdose. And so all of a sudden, you know, you guys are labeled as, oh, you know, you're the cocaine university, or, you know, all the negative that comes from that. But you think of the adversity, the trials, the tribulations, the perseverance that it took to continue to stay focused, and, you know, not let the white noise outside affect who you were, because you took that year off. You were getting physically stronger, you were growing, you were developing, you were honing your skills with that work ethic that you learned from a Lenny and from Coach Lefty before he had left. So I just think it's phenomenal, Tony, that we touch on those things. And I know that you're so humble that you won't share those things, but allow me, being a guy who was able to coach in the NBA for a brief time and had won championships in FIBA, to talk about the skill sets that you brought, and serviceable skill sets that you brought to those 12 NBA franchises. Because being drafted, you know, by the Spurs and having a Coach Popovich, who was an assistant coach in the 90s, you go back and win a championship with the Spurs in 2005, when Coach Pop is now, you know, the head coach. So for you to earn his respect and to go to all those different teams, but yet he calls on you to come back and be that leader on the bench and in the locker room, when you had a Brent Barry, a Bruce Bowen, a former guest on the show, Malik Rose, Tony Parker, Sean Marks, who's now a GM, doing a great job in the league, but, you know, Ginobili and Tim Duncan and Glenn Robinson. But yet you had a good friend of mine on that staff, Coach Joe Prunty, was on that staff with you, and Coach Bud. So
yeah.
Tell us about that championship run with the Spurs and what you learned from that culture and being a part of that team.
Well, I'll give you the short version.
Yeah,
I want people to go and because we talk about that a little bit in the book too.
that's right.
But the short version is that, you know, my rookie year, the one thing I learned as a, you know, rookie pretty early is that you gotta have to play a role. And Larry Brown made that very clear to me, or how notorious
play the right way.
Yeah, play the right way, and commit to, you know, the areas of the game that are not always glamorous. So for me, it was, he wanted to see me rebound and run the floor and make a commitment, to the defensive end. And to me, as a rookie, when he's telling me this, I'm thinking to myself, well, I can do those things, in my sleep. I can do those things with my eyes closed. Like, you don't know that I can score the basketball. You don't know that I averaged 18 in the ACC, which was, loaded with first round picks. And I was one of only two guys in the entire league to average a double-double. Like, don't you know, Larry? This is what I'm thinking to myself, in my rookie mind. And what basically Larry is telling me is that as a professional, you have to commit to a role. And when you're not the star player, I wasn't David Robinson. I wasn't Terry Cummings. I wasn't, Rod Strickland, Sean Elliott, guys that we had on the team, Willie Anderson. So I was going to have to be a guy that would go in and earn my minutes and do the dirty work. And that, that's how you're going to build your reputation, particularly at that time as a big man, because big man didn't handle the basketball and didn't shoot the basketball, a lot from the outside. And I could shoot the basketball, but, again, he wanted me to do these other things. Well, you fast forward to 2015, and those things that Larry Brown, employed me to do as a rookie ended up being the things that Greg Popovich ended up bringing me back 15 years later to do, because I proved that I could do those things over the course of my career, in addition to being able to score the basketball. So the guy that Greg Popovich saw when he was an assistant and when I was a rookie was a, completely different guy than the guy he saw in year 15 when he brought me back in 2005, to ultimately win a championship with him. I was a, better understanding of the game, much, knew what it was to be a pro, not just a pro, but a seasoned vet, and was committed to doing all the things, that it would take to win basketball games. He knew that. So he saw me develop into that, and that's why he had me back. And, I say that Coach Popovich, with no disrespect to any of my other coaches, but he's my favorite coach, of all, my entire career, not just because I won a championship with him, but because he taught me how to win.
Yeah. Oh, see, I like that. Terry, you mentioned Terry Cummings. He's also a former guest on our show. And, we talked about his ministry. And it's curious to me that all the great years that he had coming from DePaul, that he's not in the Hall of Fame yet. And it's interesting to me because he's just a great person on and off the court. What were some lessons that you learned your rookie year from, say, a Terry Cummings?
Again, I'm giving you the short version because I'm
Yeah.
running short time. Terry Cummings was the first true NBA power forward I had, the opportunity to spend significant time around.
Yeah.
He was a professional on and off the court. He taught me what it is to be a leader. Terry was a guy who was really religious and truly committed to working, and at the same time, a Chicago tough guy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's who he was. He was a good-hearted, best heart you could imagine.
Wow.
He would look out for his, the young fellas. He said, "Hey, young fellas, don't do this or don't do that or whatever." He'd give you all the old school advice, but at the same time, he beat you up on the basketball court, and he was one of the toughest guys on the team, both physically,
Wow.
and mentally, and at the same time, had the compassion to be able to sit down and talk to you about real life situations, from a pastor standpoint, because of his belief in his faith. So I learned, I learned things in increments from him, from a basketball player, not just a basketball player, but a power forward. Like, what's a real NBA power forward? Terry Cummings was a real, 1980s, 1990s NBA power forward.
Yeah.
Another guy that I wanted to emulate a little bit, because he was a power forward that could shoot the basketball, and so I liked that. And he had great 3 dribble moves. I stole a few things from him, game wise as well, because there was just, stuff that I saw that I could learn from him as soon as I got in camp. I realized it pretty quick. Like, okay, this is somebody I need to pay attention to. David Robinson is great, but I'm never going to be 7'1" at this point. So, Terry Cummings is 6'9", just like me. And, he was a little bigger than me. I think I came in the league, I was about 243 and Terry was like 250, and was strong as an ox.
Solid.
So, yeah, man. I was like, okay, that's what if I work, maybe I can, I can be that. And, I did ended up, being that. But, Terry Cummings he was a real deal.
Ooh, yes, he was. Love that. Ladies and gentlemen, again, this is Tony Massenburg, a.k.a. T-Mass, a.k.a. Hercules, sharing stories with us. And I'm sure there's, just like creating a movie, there's got to be a lot of things that, you wanted to get into the book that you couldn't. Can you
Mhm.
share a Len Bias story with our viewers that didn't make it into the book, but yet you feel it's also good enough to share with the viewers so they know who Len Bias was, who your role model was?
Well, I always say that if you want to know who Len Bias was, just Google the 1986 University of Maryland UNC versus University of Maryland in Chapel. The first loss that the Chapel that the Tar Heels ever had in the Dean Dome.
Ooh,
Considered
yeah.
relatively new at that time. They were 2 years running, never lost a game until Len Bias, came to the Tar Heels, and that game really tells you everything. I was fortunate enough to play in that game, but I was so busy watching him that I actually barely remember playing. I just remember watching him, even when I was in the game. And it was amazing. So I tell people, if you want to know a little bit about Bias, Google, Bias Tar Heels, and then watch, if just clips from that game, watch the whole game, you'll get the real essence of what he was, and more importantly, what he could have been in the NBA.
I love it. Well, take us through, because it's mentioned in the book. You'll have people stop you on the street, or you'll have people approach you at a restaurant, and they'll talk about how Len Bias impacted their lives, and maybe
Yeah.
that was some of the motivation on how you got together and say, hey, well, let's put it in
Hmm.
writing, and let's let that legacy grow. But what are
Yeah.
some of the questions that you get from people in the public about your relationship with Lenny?
Well, a lot of the questions I get was he as good as Jordan? And obviously we'll never know at the pro level, but at
Right.
the college level, he was every bit the rival that Mike needed. And he was the one thing that Mike always had a few things on a lot of people. It was either athleticism, or he just was a better basketball player, or he was just more determined to win. Those three things. Well, Len Bias had those three things too that he could have matched Jordan with. Athleticism. He had more size. He had the same drive, that same mentality, and he would not back down. So that's why I believe they would have, from a talent perspective, they were on par with one another. Uh, Len Bias was actually the better jump shooter of the two at the college level, if you can believe that.
Yes. Yes.
And so again, you're talking about MJ going to the NBA, and nobody could have foreseen how great he was going to be. We knew he was going to be great, but we didn't know he was going to be the GOAT. But we knew he had a chance, but we knew he had to improve his shooting. Well, Len Bias didn't have to improve his shooting at the NBA level. He was already a great shooter.
Yeah.
So, you got to think there were other elements of his game that he would have improved, being surrounded by the veterans like Larry Bird and Red Auerbach as his coach, and Red Auerbach as the president of the club. Uh, you know, Dennis Johnson. Kevin McHale, Robert
Mm.
Parrish. Imagine this group of championship Celtics.
Ooh.
With the opportunity to give Len Bias, who I call the perfect basketball player. From a skill standpoint. Imagine those guys
Oh.
having that ball of clay who already wants to win, by the way.
Yeah.
And all you got to do is just, mold him and shape him. And he would have, to me, changed the landscape of the NBA in the way that I don't think 6 rings would go to Chicago at that point. I'm not saying that Chicago wouldn't have gotten some rings,
Yep.
but I think there would have been a real jostle back and forth during those years, those prime years for Michael Jordan in the early, in the late 80s and the mid, early to 90s, mid 90s.
Yes. I mean, because
But
think
then,
about it, to have a Lenny Bias with that core group, to learn how to be a pro with a Dennis and a Larry and a Kevin, I
yeah,
definitely think there'd be some more banners hanging there in the Boston Gardens, because
I do.
Lenny was just that special
He was that special. He was that special. And remember,
and
Radar
versatile and versatile.
and versatile. Yeah, I mean, he would have played 3 and 4 for sure. And again, at the time period, that's probably the only two positions he would have played. But he would have been awesome. I mean, just the fact that he would have had Larry Bird. Larry Bird, who
Oh,
actually was coming to rookie camp specifically to work with Lenny. Everybody knows that story. Larry Bird. Even who was a vet at that time and MVP and everything else, he was coming to training. He was coming to rookie training camp to
wow.
work with Len Bias. So that
Wow.
gives you an idea of what Larry thought of him, and we know what Larry is, to the NBA. So
That's right.
um, it's unfortunate, but we talk about what could have been, and we also talk about why we are still inspired to this day. And I implore you guys to go out and
That's right.
check the book out. Lessonsfromlenny.com for the personal autograph copies, and the book is available anywhere books are sold.
Yeah.
Scott, I really appreciate your time, man, and
You
giving
bet.
me the come on and talk about this, something that's so important to me. And I'll leave you with this one last quote from his mom that I think
Please.
that everybody really needs to hear and to get an understanding. His mom said, and I quote, "Lenny touched more people in death than he ever could have in life."
Mm.
And she is a lady who goes on tour and talks about, campaigns against violence and drugs. And she's been doing it for years. And she's a phenomenal speaker, not a good speaker, a phenomenal speaker. Dr. Len Bias. She said that about, her son. And,
Yeah.
we talk about also Lenny's little brother in that book as well. And that really, when you read the book, you'll get also an understanding of what she had to deal with as a mother. It's a story unlike anything you've ever heard, and the way she handled it, and is still handling it to this day
Yes.
is truly truly special. So again, I thank you, Scott,
Yeah.
for the opportunity, man. And please, anytime you want to sit down and talk again, please have me on.
Oh, you bet. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, this is Tony Massenburg again, one of the co-authors of Lessons with Lenny. Go pick that book up anywhere where books are sold. Thank you so much, Tony, for taking the time from your schedule to share these stories, to share a little bit about the book. Super excited to have you on. And yeah, we may have you come back, because I know we're going to get a lot of questions, coming back and
Yep.
forth, about this book. But hey, I wish you the best. Have a great summer. Look forward to crossing paths with you in the near future, my friend, because again, whenever we can share dialogue and
Yep.
conversation like this, it's going to impact and empower others. So continue the great work, my friend. I'm awful proud of you. Congratulations on all the success.
Thanks for having me, Scott. I really appreciate it, man.
God bless you, brother.
Thank you. God bless.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, that is Tony Massenburg, who I just am so grateful for him taking the time to be a guest on the Coach Scott Field Show. I know he has to take off, but I'm going to share some more things with you about the book. Got to get out there and get this book, just because you're going to enjoy the stories, you're going to enjoy the life lessons, you're going to enjoy the in-depth knowledge that is shared. And I'm just so grateful that he took the time to share this with us. I know there's got to be a lot of questions that have come in during this conversation. Just know we will get back with you on those. Um, we got a few minutes to fill here. I just want people to know that, a lot of people talk about Michael Jordan and the success of Michael Jordan. But ladies and gentlemen, Lenny Bias, for the younger generation who is not aware of who Len Bias was, go see those YouTube clips. Go see some of the stories that were told. Go watch and educate yourself and bring awareness to who Lenny Bias was, because it truly did change the landscape of the NBA. Because think about this. The guy is drafted just the night before by the Boston Celtics, who have just won a championship. Larry Bird is coming off of an MVP. Lenny Bias was the number 2 draft pick by those Boston Celtics. And obviously, a poor decision was made. He chose to party with some of the fellas. He tried some cocaine, and the cocaine took his life. We lost Lenny Bias the night that he made a poor decision. But I don't want that to overshadow how great of an athlete he was, how good of a person he was, how wonderful of a skilled athlete he was. And you heard that from his teammate, Tony Massenburg, who played 13 seasons in the NBA. And, I, I think back to, it's one of those moments that you always remember in history, where you were when you heard the tragic news that Lenny Bias had passed away. And then later the autopsy showed that it was from cocaine. So that was a time where in the 80s, there was a big push on, just say no, don't do drugs. And his mother took that platform to, who just lost her son, who was just about ready to become a millionaire in the NBA. And his life was tragically taken because of that one poor choice that he made. So young athletes out there, think about who you surround yourself with. Think about the decisions that you make. Think about, because it only takes one, and your life can change in a split second. And take those lessons that a talented Lenny Bias had to tragically share with all of us due to that cocaine overdose that caused his heart to explode. Um, it's sad, it's compelling, it's heartfelt, it's emotional. And for Tony to come on here and share some of those stories within this book, Lessons from Lenny, please, please, please go out and get you a copy of that book. We'll answer questions. Tony can be found on social media. He's got his Twitter, he's got his Instagram, he is on Facebook. He's also into broadcast, where he does some stuff with the Wizards. So a phenomenal man with a phenomenal story, allowing the legacy of Len Bias to continue. Ladies and gentlemen, stay blessed, make good choices, continue to work hard, strive to attain your goals, and just know there are lessons to learn out there from the greatest. And wow, it's sad that he's no longer here with us, because I can only imagine the greatness that he would have continued to provide from an entertainment standpoint in the NBA. But he was tragically taken from us due to a cocaine overdose that killed him. And his mother still shares a story. See the documentaries, watch the YouTube videos. I don't want to be too repetitive with this, but I thank Tony for coming on and sharing his story. It's a shame that he had to step away from us, but just really grateful for his time. You guys continue to do what you do, and just know next week we have another fascinating guest to, share wonderful stories the way that only they can in this sports entertainment industry. God bless you, and continue to have a great summer.